Hello, everybody. It is Tuesday, April 1st. All Falls Day. I'm going to start that again, David. Okay. It's not All Falls Day, right? It's just April Fool's Day.
Yeah.
Here we go again. Hello, everybody. It is April. Hello, everybody. It is Tuesday, April the 1st. Is it Fool's? What is it? Fool's?
I think it's just April Fool's Day.
Okay, I'm starting again.
All right, take three.
April Fool's Day is taking over this show. Hello, everybody. It is Tuesday, April the 1st, April Fool's Day, a day for fools. The New York Times, I think, suggests that maybe we should read 1984 because we're all living in Orwell's world now, although I'm not sure Orwell would have been a big fan of April Fool's Day, and I don't think the origins of the day have anything to do with Orwell. According to Wikipedia itself, a little bit of an April Fool's joke. April Fool's Day comes out of reading Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, which may or may not be true. It's a wonderfully comic book, but a savagely comic book too. Seems to be in America these days, at least in 2025. Every day is All Fool's Day. Every day brings more and more outlandish, absurd, funny to some, I guess, tragic to other stories. There's a story of Pete Hegseth bringing his wife to sensitive meetings. Of course, Pete Hegseth of the call, the Houthi call. One of the most astonishing things is that Donald Trump is increasingly looking like the adult in the room. He's certainly an adult, for better or worse, within his cabinet. We have RFK Jr., our health secretary, body shaming the West Virginia governor. Top vaccine officials resigning because of RFK Jr.'s promotion of misinformation, of lies. Everything indeed is April Fool's Day. And of course, tomorrow we have April the 2nd, supposedly Liberation Day, Tariff Day. So April the 1st seems to have become universal. And I think that's a sense that's shared by my guest today, my old friend David Masciotra. I'm not going to ruin his name on April 1. He has a new piece out in Unheard called Trump's Fantasyland. He seduces fanatics of left and right. It's an excellent piece about the absurdity, the humor, at least inadvertent, in the Trump administration. And David, as always, is joining us from his home near Chicago. David, am I right? Is every day in America now April 1?
Oh, yeah. Every day is the day where we have to break out the instructional manual for tic-tac-toe and pass it around. The Trump administration is absurd. That's a good word for them. And they seem to coalesce a variety of stupidities and absurdities into one structure. And that is, unfortunately, the White House, which more and more resembles an asylum. But what I'm driving at in the piece that you were kind enough to mention and compliment is that this doesn't come out of nowhere. The journalist and historian Kurt Anderson wrote a very important book called Fantasyland, in which he applies that term to the United States of America, explaining that for too long, our dominant culture has accommodated, perhaps out of misguided politeness, some of it out of a customer is always right ethos, but we've accommodated a variety of ridiculous, unfactual, and silly beliefs. And that accommodation has created the consequence of people like Pete Hegseth and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Making the decisions that will dictate, to a large extent, American policy, foreign and domestic, over the next 4 years. So, I mean, you have children in Texas turning yellow because they're following RFK's recommendations of vitamin A treatments for measles. And then you have Hegseth, conducting foreign policy briefs on impending bombing operations over a group chat application and behaving essentially like a dry drunk, bringing his wife to meetings. And this passes as acceptable in American culture.
And we haven't even mentioned Greenland.
Yeah, and Canada too. Our 51st.
Well, this weekend, Trump said, "Yeah, we'll get Greenland 100%." And he also said, just to add to the absurdity of our moment, that he wasn't joking about a third term. I'm not sure if Trump is ever completely serious, but it's a very absurd situation. David, you mentioned, and I know that Kurt Anderson's piece, his book, Fantasyland, inspired you to write this piece. The subtitle of Fantasyland is How America Went Haywire. It assumes that there was a time when America wasn't haywire. Do you share Anderson's belief that America was once, shall we say, sane?
Well, I write in my essay that con artistry, religious extremism, bogus conspiracy theories, all of these, hucksterism, all of these things have a long, sordid history in the United States, and they sometimes manifest with very dangerous and often deadly consequences. Everything from manifest destiny, which was the justification for all kinds of imperialistic projects, to McCarthyism and the Lavender Scare. But what's happened, and this is where actually your work is helpful, Cult of the Amateur, which we've discussed before on this program and other texts. What's happened is that we've seen, for some understandable reasons and for some ridiculous reasons, we've seen the demolition of the gatekeeper institutions that kept all of those forces of inanity and absurdity at bay. So now the gates have swung wide open, and the crazy people outnumber the responsible and disciplined people. So it only stands to reason that in a representative democracy, they now run the country.
Yeah, and the phrase, of course, is that the inmates are running the asylum, but that also assumes there are some people who aren't inmates within the asylum, and the more one lives through this, the more one assumes that everyone's in the asylum. One of the arguments you make, David, in the book, which is interesting, and you do this on Unheard, which is perhaps a more right-wing conservative side, although certainly not a MAGA Trump side, is you suggest that there's a right-left axis on this, that Democrats generally say, well, it's just conservatives who have gone haywire, and there are some traditional conservatives who still see wokeness as the central feature of haywire America. But your argument is that it's what you call a bipartisan phantasm. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, there's a specific way to explain that, in that if we look at the Trump administration, undoubtedly most of the governing forces of that assembly, it comes from the right wing: Christian nationalism, the authoritarian concept of a unitary executive. But we can't neglect or forget to acknowledge that some very key figures in that administration come from a left-wing background, and the left wants to dissociate from these people. But I speak of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who, even though he's lurched right in this bizarre relationship with Trump, he still has favor among the crunchies, which is a term describing a new age group of hippie style health nuts who reject Western medicine, reject the entire pharmaceutical industries, reject conventional dietary standards. And these are people mainly of a left-wing variety. And Kennedy speaks for them. And then you have Tulsi Gabbard, who, although she has all kinds of connections with a Hindu adjacent cult in Hawaii, which is neither left nor right, she has a certain reflexive anti-Americanism, a suspicion of America that's very popular on the left. It's an anti-imperialism for fools that posits any adversary of the United States, such as Vladimir Putin or Bashir Assad or the Communist Party of China, is somehow misunderstood, and that whatever the United States' role is in a global conflict, we can immediately assume that it's one of villainy. So Tulsi Gabbard's, her nomination to DNI received applause from anti-war groups, so-called anti-war groups like Code Pink. She received applause from left associated journalists like Matt Taibbi and Max Blumenthal. So Trump has, in his rejection of the liberal consensus and empirical standards of verifying an argument, he's managed to assemble this group of eccentric and delusional people whose ideas are far more damaging than the decadent status quo. Even if we agree that reform and reevaluation was necessary, this isn't going to do it. This is only going to make things worse, as we're already seeing with public health, and we're already seeing with foreign policy. And as you mentioned, tomorrow, so-called Liberation Day, I guess liberation from knowledge, we may soon find out with economic issues.
Yeah, and of course, economic issues are real. I want to come to how reality bites back if it does. But I wonder, you talked about Kurt Anderson. It's more than 13 years ago. It was one of my favorite, when the show was on TechCrunch, Keenon was on TechCrunch. I had Kurt Anderson on the show. I think he's been on since. I think he actually was on to talk about Fantasyland. But he wrote a very powerful essay called "You Say You Want a Devolution" in Vanity Fair in January 2012. I'm not sure if you read this, David. I think you'd find it interesting. What Anderson observed is that in America, nothing much is changed except technology. You're kind enough to talk about Cult of the Amateur. Is the foundations for all this the revolution of media? Because as you know, there have always been crazy people around. There have always been people whose reality doesn't conform to the majority of people, and people who invent their own reality, bizarre reality. But now this seems to be something that's shared by everybody.
Yeah, so I would
not
say,
everybody. I mean, I hope you and I have been, so to speak, vaccinated from it, but many Americans anyway.
Yeah, there are two things going on. So first of all, there is the reason that this is more prevalent on the right, it's not exclusive to the right, is that the Republican Party and right-leaning media play footsie with the psychos in such a way that doesn't happen, at least not as of now, in the mainstream of the left. So if you remember when Rachel Maddow went too far with her accusations of Trump's collusion with Russia, she had to apologize on the air because her credibility and therefore her audience was at stake. It's impossible to imagine a Fox News host, unless under legal duress, apologizing for anything, no matter how absurd. So it is worse on the right. But you're correct, and Anderson's correct when he writes about a certain cultural stagnation that has set in because what the new media landscape has done is it's demolished any kind of standard that was once operative for entering into the discourse. And when the sole arbiter of value becomes clicks and followers and so-called friends, then you're going, especially when then paired with malicious algorithms at work, you're going to have that which gets the most attention, the fastest and easiest rise to the top. And that means something that's crazy. That means something that's outrageous. So there were a lot of problems. I'll say this is one thing where I've learned I was wrong. When I was a college student and a graduate student, and I was marching against the war in Iraq and on the far progressive left, I imbibed on Noam Chomsky and other media theorists, and I believed that we needed to get rid of these gatekeepers because they were manufacturing consent, to use Chomsky's slogan, and they were excluding the truth from our debate. And much of Chomsky's critique was correct. But what we've learned is that the anything goes combination of gullibility and cynicism that now dictates and dominates our discourse is vastly worse. And that was something that you predicted in the Cult of the Amateur. So
yeah, I mean, but David, coming back to Orwell, 1984, you remember back in 84, Postman wrote his Amusing Ourselves to Death, saying we got it wrong, that Orwell wasn't really the relevant book. It was Huxley's Brave New World. At what point in this, and I can't remember in Huxley's Brave New World whether even reality appeared. It appeared in a sense as Shakespeare. But reality hasn't gone away. I mean, that's the thing. Even today on April 1, Trump's April 1 trade report is going to come out. And that's real. There's no fancy. There's no Pete Hegseth. There's no RFK Jr. There's no Greenland. These are real things impacting real people's lives. So with or without social media, with or without the internet, reality hasn't gone away entirely, has it?
No, but okay, so two people who have taken a lot of slings and arrows of slander in recent years are Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida. And I won't launch into a post-structuralist lecture, but even though they had very different ideas in some respects, and at one point they were at each other's throats, what they both identified was that we were entering into an era where every mode of signification was just signifying other forms of signification. So we can't really get to the truth. Neither said that there is no truth. That's the slander against them. But they said that we can't really get to the truth because the way in which languages work and power manipulates language is we're always signifying something that's already signified.
Yeah, but David, all that theory is all very well, and I'm sure it was fine when you were a grad student. But as you mentioned, kids are going orange or yellow in Texas as a consequence of RFK's idiocy. And parents are not reading Foucault and Derrida and saying, oh, well, that reflects postmodernism and that's kind of interesting. People are completely outraged. Shadi Hamid had an interesting piece a day or two ago in the Washington Post talking about the beginning of the end of the Trump era. And he talks about reality returning because of its impact on people's lives.
Well, here's where the theory meets the pavement, so to speak. And I read your work in graduate school too. You were actually paired with Derrida, so it wasn't all.
Oh, that was an honor for Derrida.
well, here's where the theory meets the pavement, is that we can look to a historical antecedent. Many of Hitler's most loyal supporters, and I'm not making a direct comparison of Trump to Hitler.
Yeah, I brought up there. You brought up the H word there, David.
But they were still saying
we're only 20 minutes into this conversation.
They were still saying Sig Heil when the bombs were falling on German cities. People's capacity, and Jonestown, they still drank the Kool-Aid even as those around them were dying. People's capacity to delude and deceive themselves in service of ideology and tribalism knows no bounds. So yes, reality still exists, and it will persuade some people to return to the actual universe, not an alternative universe that they've created and imagined. But we're also reading stories about, for example, a man whose wife was deported to Peru, and he says he does not regret his vote. He voted for Trump. There will be many people.
Well, maybe he didn't like his wife.
That's always a possibility.
Where was this story?
I read it in USA Today. I don't remember the state in which he lives, but there will be many people who will believe what Trump and Fox News and Joe Rogan and others tell them. And you know as well as I do that if, let's say, the economy tanks.
Well, the economy is tanking. We have the return of inflation. We're going to have prices, cars going up 20-25% because of tariff policy. I mean, these things are real.
Trump's going to find a way to blame the Democrats, and at least half of his supporters will believe that. Howard Dean, when he was running for president, said, not even Fox News can convince you that you have a job when you don't. Now I'm not so sure. We've seen Trump convince millions of people that he won an election that he lost, that January 6th was either an FBI conspiracy or a harmless day, like tourists taking a visit of the Capitol. He is quite powerful and adept at creating alternative realities. And unless people are severely affected on a personal level, I believe that the fantasy land ethos will continue to prevail. And even among those who are personally affected, such as this man whose wife was deported to Peru, there will be some who accept what the great leader tells them. And that's a consequence of living in a fantasy land country where, out of a fear of snobbery and a misguided application of democracy, we have allowed for the perception that all ideas are equal, all opinions have the same value, and therefore everyone has the same contribution to our public discourse and debate. Removing the gatekeepers has allowed for the demolition of every standard, maintaining some control over public argument. And when we lose those standards, what we see is people can believe anything.
You're sounding very conservative, David. No wonder your stuff gets bought by unheard. But I still have faith in reality. I mean, the Trump people pulled the UN nominee because they didn't want to fight that battle. There's supposedly, at least according to the New York Times, there's a competitive race for Mike Waltz's seat in Florida, his 6th district. Trump won that by 30 points. So I'm giving American voters more benefit of the doubt than you. I think that people are much more grounded in reality than perhaps you're suggesting.
Oh, I think that the Democrats could certainly take control of, at a minimum, the House in the midterms, and I think they could certainly win the White House in 2028. I mean, we still live in a pretty evenly divided country, and all of this Democratic self-flagellation and self-hatred strikes me as nonsense. I mean, Kamala Harris lost the key swing states by margins under 2%. And so this was a close election, but my fear, short term, I'm not gloom and doom. I certainly agree with you that if a few of these indices go the wrong way and Democrats can clean up in 2026 and 2028. But my fear is we have documented facts that the American people are consuming less news, cannot identify their representative in Congress. Americans read less in general, and we cannot continue to roll the dice on civic and historic illiteracy and expect to win. So you're going to see future Trumps and future hucksters and religious extremists and weirdos down the line generate attention among the American people. And that attention, especially in what we call an attention economy, can bear political fruit.
So I wonder, David, whether Democrats need to learn something from the fact that every day in America seems to be April the 1st, Fool's Day, April Fool's Day, because too many Democrats are sounding perhaps rather sourly conservative, almost perhaps in a way like you, that people aren't reading enough, that they're delusional, and that they believe in all this nonsense. And they continue to lose elections, and they continue to look divided. Is there a way for the Democrats to incorporate an element of, shall we say, Fantasyland, of Kurt Anderson, Trump's Fantasyland? America's always been Fantasyland, one kind or another. It seems as if, whereas the Republicans have completely been taken over by Fantasyland, and they're not able to recognize any kind of reality, the Democrats are the reverse. They don't see any fancy. They're not able to offer any kind of narrative that will encourage people to wear funny clothes and smile.
I think that's a fair point. I do think that Democrats need to show more imagination and more aggression. They seem to have lost faith in themselves, and when people are consumed by self-doubt and they're always second-guessing themselves, they can hardly inspire others to support them. So, I mean, as you know, we talked once about Jesse Jackson. I've written a book on him, and although his runs for the presidency in the 80s were ultimately unsuccessful in electoral terms, they were very successful in ushering all kinds of new constituencies into the party. And what he did is he had a big policy agenda, and he spoke in very clear, confrontational terms about pushing that agenda in such a way that would meet the moment of Reagan's America. I think that the climate is ripe for a leader with a similar boldness and bravery and aggression. And I think that Democratic voters want to see someone take the fight directly to Trump. One of the problems with that prescription from a policy level is that the United States of America is so vastly behind comparable countries. Medicare for all or some kind of universal health care program polls well, but it's also something that Western Europe and Canada and Japan have had for decades.
I wonder if they even have April 1st in Denmark. Do they, David?
Yeah, I don't know. And maybe
you were critical of Gavin Newsom for having some of the right-wing brosphere on his show. Don't Democrats really need to incorporate some fantasy if they're able to compete in this new world of Fantasyland, which, as you say, isn't going away?
Well, Newsom's losing everyone. I mean, this selling out to the right wing authoritarians and bigots. It's costing him his credibility and stature with the progressive left, and no one on the right is going to support Newsom. So that's just bewildering. I'm hesitant to give this example because I didn't like what she said, but Jasmine Crockett recently referred to Governor Abbott of Texas as Hot Wheels, which I found crude and offensive. I don't think people should mock the disabilities of others. But
is Abbott disabled?
Yes, he's in a wheelchair.
And this is a Republican.
Yes. So, but Crockett refused to apologize.
I'm guessing, David, you were privately rather amused with that.
No. I mean, I don't think we should mock people for their disabilities.
Even Republicans?
Yes, even Republicans.
Even on April 1st?
Well, yeah. But, Crockett refused to apologize. And she did this Trump-like move of saying, by referring to him as Hot Wheels, I was describing the planes, trains, and automobiles he's used to transport migrants to other cities. And even though I didn't like what she said, I thought, well, here's someone who gets it. Here's someone who understands the new media landscape in which we live.
But why does the caveat even have to come with that, David? I didn't actually know that story. I think it's one of the more cheerful things I've heard today. Why do you even need to? Aren't you still in thrall of your ex-friends on the left? Everything has to get censored. Why can't we make jokes? As progressives, isn't that what's really missing? I mean, Trump, for everything that is so loathsome about him, I mean, he still is able to crack a funny joke from time to time, even that might make you and I smile.
I don't think that it's particularly progressive to mock people for a disability.
Even a Republican governor of Texas?
Yeah, sure. Because that it trickles down, and other people in wheelchairs will then feel.
What happens when you trickle down wheelchairs, David?
What's that?
What happens when wheelchairs trickle down? I'm sure we have some metaphors.
Right. Well, this is all on the fly. I'll come up with a better metaphor next time.
Can you be on the fly in a wheelchair?
That depends. That depends. Ask Elon Musk.
I'm going to lose all my disabled followers.
But my point is,
you putting me in a wheelchair.
My point is if I can acquire some mobility, some rhetorical mobility here with this argument.
Oh, you're adding the mobility to the wheelchair metaphor now.
My point is that Jasmine Crockett, I didn't particularly care for the joke itself, but I liked that her response wasn't one of masochism and self-imposed humiliation. I think that she understands that in this new media landscape, the key is to just keep moving. Make another joke if you'd like, and to show defiance. I mean, people like that about Trump, that he's consistently defiant. unfortunately, he's defiant in the name of stupidity and megalomania and persecution of other people. Someone like Jasmine Crockett can show defiance in the name of higher purposes and higher goals. And that's something Democrats should adopt as a
and I
method of
actually think
persuasion.
people on the left now are rather fearful of Vance. They say that he's the next version of Trump, a younger, maybe more effective version. But what Vance is lacking is any kind of humor. He takes himself so seriously because he actually thinks he's smart, which he isn't, of course. So, I mean, he's not in a wheelchair, but maybe mentally he is.
He certainly is mentally.
I mean, finally, David, on April 1, we got to go out and have some more humor. Where is it conceivable that there is a Trump somewhere on the left, or certainly within the progressive community, that someone, I mean, this Crockett woman you talk about, maybe she offers some possibilities, but is it possible that we will get someone who is able to communicate with the American electorate, establish the kind of necessary communication that will make them as beloved as these characters in your piece who show up for Trump wearing absurd caps and even more absurd clothing?
Well, as of right now, and this is a good thing, I don't think that Gavin Newsom or J.B. Pritzker or anyone else, someone we're not even aware of, could ingratiate himself or herself to the Democratic Party while telling as many lies and advancing so many delusional theories as Trump. There are still some higher intellectual standards of entrance in the Democratic Party. But the flip side of that is those standards have become so calcified that it treats anything novel or anything more spontaneous and adventurous with suspicion. So I would say that the chief task for the Democratic Party is to develop develop some balance. How can we maintain our standards of honesty and fidelity to facts and reason, but loosen up so that we allow into the picture some humor and some adventure, and we don't have to poll test and consultant approve every single message. And that seems to be what Jasmine Crockett understands.
Yeah, you're allowed to, on this show at least, you're allowed to make jokes about disabled people. So on I know on New Year's Day you're supposed to make resolutions. On April 1, what's your resolution? No more reading Derrida and Foucault, David?
Well, no more.
That's real idiocy. You've grown up from that, haven't you?
No more referring to Derrida and Foucault on Keen on America, at a minimum.
Well, I'll have to come up with what should I have a resolution? No more jokes about disabled people?
Yeah, maybe that could be yours. But you know, I'm up for a 3-hour confab on Foucault's idea of biopower, if you're ever.
Yeah, well, I'm afraid you'll have to go on another show to do that.
I'll start my own and I'll invite
David
you on.
Masciotra, as always, a very wise man and a smart man and a funny man. I like the disability jokes. I'm probably going to get banned from the internet or banned from everything, but still it's worth it. Happy April 1, David. And I have a feeling that my optimism is going to be borne out in the next few months, but we shall see. So we'll talk again in the not too distant future.